With or without Westminster's approval, the people of Scotland will, within the next 18 months, be offered the opportunity to vote for a future as an independent nation. That was the clear commitment from the First Minister as she launched the first in a series of papers highlighting the potential benefits of breaking away from the United Kingdom. But can she deliver on that promise if the UK government continues to insist that now is not the time? Earlier, we spoke to the chairman of the Scottish Conservatives, Craig Hoy.
I think what was a little worrying yesterday, and perhaps Angus Robertson can answer the question that he didn't answer to my colleague Murdo Fraser yesterday, is what is that plan B? If there is no Section 30 order, does that mean we are now in the territory of wildcat or illegal referendums? Because that's what the First Minister seemed to hint at yesterday, and that would be deeply worrying for the Scottish people, for Scottish business and for the Scottish economy.
Angus Robertson is the Cabinet Secretary for the Constitution. He's with us now. Good morning to you.
Hey, good morning. Hello.
When will you ask the UK government for a Section 30 order?
Well, the First Minister made clear yesterday that she intends to make an announcement to the Scottish Parliament in the forthcoming weeks about the route map towards the referendum, which we intend to hold next October. You'll appreciate, given the ruling of the presiding officer about announcements of such importance being made in the Parliament, it's not my place to make sneak previews of that on Good Morning Scotland. What I am here to talk about is the publication of the first paper in the prospectus series that the Scottish Government is publishing in the run-up to the referendum next year.
But all of that becomes null and void if we don't ask the UK government for a Section 30 order. So is that definitely going to happen before Parliament breaks for recess?
Well, I see no reason for the UK government to deny a Section 30 order. I think most of your listeners will be aware that this is the procedure that was agreed in the run-up to the 2014 independence referendum, the gold standard of holding a recognised, agreed constitutional referendum. That was what a Conservative Prime Minister, incidentally also working in coalition with the Liberal Democrats at that time, who agreed that given that a majority had been returned to the Scottish Parliament in favour of a referendum, that was what should happen then, and there's no reason why that should happen now.
Mark Spencer, the Commons leader, has told MPs there should be a 25-year gap from the 2014 vote, which means you could be forced to wait until 2039 for a second Scottish independence referendum if the Conservative government at Westminster gets its way.
Well, I'm breathing in and I'm sighing because to actually reflect on what that means is somebody not elected in Scotland, representing a government that has not been returned in Scotland since 1955, telling the people of Scotland what they can and can't do. We're in the territory of democracy denial when I hear things like that. Incidentally, not a dissimilar observation that I could make about Craig Hoy, who was on your programme half an hour ago from the Scottish Conservatives, somebody who, when he ran in last year's election, was defeated and came in third in East Lothian, on BBC Radio Scotland, lecturing the electorate about what they did or didn't agree to in an election. The facts speak for themselves. There was a Scottish Parliament election last year.
That's just the way the system works. He's a list MSP, and the UK votes for an electoral party. This is the way the system works. So let's look at another question then. What happens if they say no? What happens? What is Plan B?
Forgive me, I'm not going to gloss over this point. Craig Hoy ran in an election where he was saying, vote for me, I will oppose an independence referendum. And he stood against an SNP candidate saying, vote for me, I'm in favour of independence referendum. And do you know what happened in East Lothian? The people elected the SNP and they defeated Craig Hoy.
Okay.
And on your programme, we had an election loser telling the government what the people of Scotland had or hadn't voted for. It's Orwellian.
Well, that's the way the Scottish voting system works. At Holyrood, it's a list system, so he's there whether you like it or not. He's there whether you like it or not.
No, forgive me, he stood in a constituency and he was not elected as a constituency MSP. And so, as a backup, he was elected on the list. I'm simply making the point that we are, and we've already had 2 interviews this morning on this point, the losing parties in an election lecturing the party and the government that did win the election.
Well, let's move on to a question you can answer then. You're saying that you will ask for a Section 30 order. What will you do if the UK government, and it seems likely that it will, says no to that Section 30 order? What is Plan B?
Well, I'm not going to get into the speculation of what happens a number of steps down the road. We still have the opportunity to secure a Section 30 order. As all of your listeners will know, Scottish politics has a long history of UK governments going no, 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 yes. That's what happened in the run-up to the referendum in 2014. And I still think we should work on the basis of the gold standard of democracy, which is that surely all of us involved in politics agree that when the people vote for something to happen in this country, it's what should happen. We shouldn't be getting into hypotheticals.
If it's gold standard, though, what does that mean? If it's the gold standard, what does that mean? Any subsequent independence referendum that goes ahead without a Section 30 order, what would that make that? Would it be substandard?
No, but I'm wanting to stick with the main point, which is we have an agreed route. Okay. We have a precedent. We've been able to do this before. There's no reason why we shouldn't do this again. And incidentally, this has also historically been the position of the Scottish Conservative Party. When asked about it, Ruth Davidson, talking about a second independence referendum, this is in 2016, said, "I've never said it should be denied. Constitutionally, the UK government shouldn't block it. No." So that's exactly.
Well, let's look at the timeline then. Let's talk about the timeline for this. The last referendum was held 2 years after the Edinburgh Agreement. The Edinburgh Agreement was signed in 2012, so it took 2 years to get from the agreement being signed to an independence referendum being held. Your government wants to hold one in the autumn of 2023. It sounds like the timeline is unrealistic, just even within the timings of the last referendum.
No, it's not. And, not every election and not every referendum is an exact copy of those that went before. And incidentally, in democracy is not a one-off. One is able to vote repeatedly in referenda, repeatedly in elections. That's the normality in a democracy. And I'm fully content that with the prospectus beginning to be rolled out, with the announcements that will follow on the route map about how that is going to be achieved, that we have a perfectly adequate window of opportunity, both for legislation to be passed, for the opportunity for the people to scrutinise the prospectus that the Scottish Government will publish, and also hold the opponents to account. I note that neither the Labour or Tory representatives on the programme this morning even began to explain why the UK is performing so badly against all of our neighbouring countries, which was the subject of the document that was actually published yesterday. And the reason that they didn't is because they can't. All of our neighbouring countries perform significantly better than Scotland does with the United Kingdom because they have the powers of independence. That's what
they all have. Many of them, the Scandinavian countries, are much higher taxation. They have to pay for medical treatment in several of the countries quoted. I think it's €35 in the south of Ireland. Those sort of things weren't in that document yesterday. You were just saying that they perform much better, but you don't tell people how much extra they might have to pay in order to get that better performance.
I think, in fairness, anybody who had read the document would point out that it made absolutely clear that there were different economic models represented in these 10 countries. Incidentally, all of them are our neighbours, from Ireland to Iceland to Denmark to Norway to Sweden to Finland to the Netherlands to Belgium and also Switzerland and Austria.
But it wasn't giving people the full information, though, about what they would be choosing to follow, what sort of economic model they might like to follow.
Well, this is a substantial document, and I encourage all your listeners to have a look at it on the Scottish Government website and make up their own mind. The document does make clear that these countries have pursued different policies. However, what all of them have in common is that they are significantly wealthier and fairer societies. They not only are they wealthier, the wealth gap is lower than the UK, income inequality is lower than the UK, poverty rates are lower than the UK, they have higher social mobility, there's a smaller gender pay gap, they have higher productivity. I could go on. All of these countries do significantly better, and we have to ask ourselves in Scotland, do we want to remain in the same lane with Boris Johnson and his Brexit fixation, or do we want to do what every other normal country does, which is make decisions for ourselves and have the benefits of what all of those other countries have? Because that's the choice.
Yeah. Given that we've between the last referendum and this new campaign, we've had Brexit, and we spoke to a polling expert and a politics expert, Professor Rob Johns, earlier in the programme, and he said that Brexit has made independence a more attractive destination, but much more difficult to get to. Do you think you're leaving enough time for the undecideds in this campaign, and there are fewer of them, to actually change their mind, to choose yes as you want them to?
I think so. You've hit on a good point, which is, of course, I'm very fixed in my views. I believe Scotland should be an independent country in the European Union. Your Labour and Tory interview partners earlier do not share that view. But you're absolutely right to point out that there are a significant number of people in Scotland who have not made up their mind. And I think I'm right in saying there are about 500,000 people, because they were either too young at the time or they've moved to Scotland subsequently, who didn't take part in the referendum in 2014. All of them will be able to make up their own minds on the basis of the case that's made by the Scottish Government. That is, out of the series of prospectus papers.
And you don't think Brexit's made those arguments more difficult because it's been so messy?
Well, I think for a great many people, it's made it a lot easier because people have been denied their citizenship rights, have been taken out of the European Union against their will. We've had a disastrous impact for our exporting industries. So I think for a lot of people, the choice has become a lot clearer. It's about a Scotland within the European Union, restoring citizenship rights and putting us at the heart of the biggest single market in the world,
we'll have to leave it there.
It is part of Boris Johnson's Brexit Britain.
Angus Robertson, thank you so much for your time this morning. Cabinet Secretary for the Constitution there, Angus Robertson.